Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Vidya Ananthakrishnan, and I co-direct our Youth Justice Initiatives project at the Columbia Justice Lab. YJI aims to create a world where all youth, particularly youth of color and those who have long been marginalized, have the opportunities and supports they need to grow, flourish, and thrive in their own homes and communities outside of the legal system. I'm excited that today's panel, Community Supports for Youth and Families, is focused on diving into that very idea. This panel is the culmination of our Taking on Transformation series, which aims to guide and support system leaders in shifting away from the youth prison model and creating a community-centered approach. This series is co-hosted by the Youth Correctional Leaders for Justice, a group of over 70 current and past youth justice administrators calling for the end of the punitive youth prison model and pushing for investments in communities. As we near the close of this Youth Justice Action Month, this conversation will bring into focus why community-based supports and opportunities for young people are so critical, highlight groups in different communities that are supporting kids outside of systems, and examine how systems can play a role in advancing shifts that enable groups to be successful and well-resourced into the future. We're so grateful to our partners and our funders, without whom we could not do this work. I also want to remind everyone that even though this will remain a closed panel, we will reserve time at the end for the panelists to answer questions. Please use the Q&A feature in your webinar control panel to submit questions at any time through the discussion, as we may not see questions posted directly into the chat. And lastly, we will be recording this event and posting it to our project website at takingontransformation.org, where you can also watch our past panels. Without further ado, I'm really excited that we're going to begin today with some remarks from Liz Ryan, Administrator of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. Liz Ryan was appointed by President Biden to be the administrator of OJJDP on May 16, 2022. Prior to leading OJJDP, Ms. Ryan served as president and CEO of the Youth First Initiative, a national campaign focused on ending the incarceration of youth by investing in community-based alternatives. To date, Youth First has achieved the closure of many youth prisons across several states and redirected more than $50 million into community-based alternatives to incarceration. Earlier, Ms. Ryan founded the Campaign for Youth Justice, a national multi-state initiative that sought to end the prosecution of youth in adult criminal courts and the placement of youth in adult jails and prisons. She also co-founded and co-chaired Act for Juvenile Justice, a campaign to reauthorize the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act. I don't have time to go into all her other achievements and accolades, but we will be sure to post her full bio with the recording of this event, and we are incredibly honored and lucky to have Liz with us today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Liz.
Thank you, Vidya. I'm Liz Ryan, Administrator of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, or OJJDP, affectionately known as JJ here at the Office of Justice Programs. OJJDP is a federal agency created nearly 50 years ago through the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act. The Columbia Justice Lab, Youth Correctional Leaders for Justice, and OJJDP share many common goals and strategies. Among them, developing and implementing effective alternatives to youth incarceration. I'm eager to speak with you this afternoon about community-based alternatives to the youth prison model, resources that enable young people to thrive while living at home in their communities with people they know and trust. Our shared vision emphasizes transforming the juvenile justice system. It takes real work to make real change, and real work requires implementing actionable research, listening to youth and families who are directly impacted by the juvenile justice system, and strategizing with experts like all of you. OJJDP is committed to the hard work required to make this vision a reality. As many of you know, October is Youth Justice Action Month. Each year, stakeholders from across the country unite to raise awareness and encourage concrete action on behalf of young people involved in the youth justice system. OJJDP has co-hosted several Youth Justice Action Month activities this year, all of them focused on spurring action for real reform. On October 27th, we are hosting a panel with youth leaders who will present their policy recommendations on their vision of youth justice to OJJDP. We will seriously consider their recommendations and try to address as many as we can in our OJJDP action plan to be released later this year. These young people's insights will help us to better understand problems and consider solution-oriented options. The juvenile justice system must be transformed to meet their needs. That goal, which I know we share, is reflected in OJJDP's top 3 priorities. You may already have heard me discuss them. They are treating children as children, serving children at home with their families and their communities, and opening up opportunities for system-involved young people. When a young person encounters the juvenile justice system, it should be a system designed to help them make good choices for the future, not one focused on incarceration and punishment. Young people who break the law can be held accountable, but incarceration is not the answer. The United States spends an estimated $5 billion each year to incarcerate our youth, but state recidivism data show that approximately 55% of confined youth are rearrested within 1 year of their release. This country's resources are much better invested in evidence-based and evidence-informed programs that serve youth in their home communities, keeping them in school and at work, connected with their families. Incarceration is a form of punishment that does little to help rehabilitate youth. In many cases, it further traumatizes them. More than 2/3 of youth involved with law enforcement or the juvenile justice system have already suffered trauma. Research underscores the damage youth experience when confined, from disruptions in their education to delayed psychosocial development and sexual victimization. Studies show that adverse childhood experiences can enormously impact a child's likelihood to suffer or perpetuate future violence. Community-based alternatives have shown to positively impact youth behavior and reduce reoffending by emphasizing therapeutic or educational approaches. They give youth a chance for better outcomes. In the long run, community-based services are more effective and less costly than incarceration. And there is broad support for replacing incarceration with community-based services, such as rehabilitation, educational opportunities, job training, and programs enabling young people to repair the harm they've caused. At OJJDP, we regularly hear from communities searching for science-based solutions that take a developmental approach, emphasizing positive youth development. There's also clear evidence of state support for community-based alternatives to youth incarceration. Many large state correctional facilities for young people now operate well below capacity. According to recently released data from OJJDP's Juvenile Residential Facilities Census, 85% of youth residential facilities are operating below capacity, and the number of young people in residential placement fell 77% between the years 2000 and 2020. We know that youth arrests fell dramatically during that same period. Recent data show that the number of overall arrests involving youth decreased 84% between 1996 and 2020, from more than 2.5 million to fewer than 450,000. Between 2019 and 2020, they fell 38% for youth under 18. The data also shows a steep decline in the number of youth arrests for violent crimes, including murder, robbery, and aggravated assault. In 2020, the estimated number reached a new low, down 78% from its peak in 1994. Of the estimated 424,000 overall arrests of youth in 2020, fewer than 10% were for a violent crime. These data, which are the latest available, confirm that efforts to transform the juvenile justice system into one emphasizing opportunities and youth potential do have a real and positive impact on reducing youth crime. I'd like to share 3 of OJJDP's current efforts supporting community-based services that are intended to promote positive youth outcomes, increase public safety, and strengthen families and neighborhoods. First, a new solicitation, the Community-Based Alternatives to Youth Incarceration Initiative. Under this program, funding will support states' efforts to close and repurpose youth correctional facilities, assess and respond to the impact of those closures on facility staff and the surrounding community, and reinvest savings into trauma-informed, evidence-based and informed programs that serve youth involved in the juvenile justice system and their families. Second, our Juvenile Justice System Reform and Reinvestment Initiative, which focuses on states' intervention programs to prevent and reduce youth recidivism. This initiative also supports research-based, developmentally appropriate, trauma-informed programs for youth, and it demands that states reinvest their savings. Funded states must develop sustainable reinvestment strategies to fund additional programs shown to be effective at reducing recidivism. And finally, OJJDP's Title II Formula Grants Program, one of our primary funding vehicles. Title II awards go directly to states and territories, enabling them to provide direct assistance to young people, both those involved in the juvenile justice system and at risk of involvement. For fiscal year 2022 awards, OJJDP is requiring states to devote at least 75% of Title II funding to evidence-based or promising programs that promote positive youth development, including community-based alternatives to youth incarceration. Earlier, I mentioned OJJDP's 3 priorities, our roadmap for transforming the juvenile justice system and broadening opportunities for young people. 2 essential principles run through each of our priorities. First, pursuing racial equity and fairness, and second, centering youth and their families, putting them at the center of everything we do. OJJDP is absolutely committed to hearing and responding to the insights of youth and families, most especially those directly impacted by the juvenile justice system. We know that justice system involved youth are uniquely qualified to identify their needs as they grow and navigate the transition to adulthood. They have experienced firsthand the programs that worked and the programs that did not work. Any strategies intended to serve them must be informed by their insights and lived experience. Over the summer, we hosted a series of listening sessions in town halls with juvenile justice system stakeholders and young people from across the country. Young people told us that they want community-based programs such as life skills training. They want school-based supports like mentoring programs and guidance counselors who know how the juvenile justice system operates. And they want community-based mental health services and programs to help them heal from trauma. Many of the young people shared that they specifically want more supports for their needs when they return home after residential placement. They hope for a robust reentry system that addresses housing, food, and transportation needs, a system that's available into early adulthood. They said that youth benefit from mentors and peers who can help them connect with wraparound services, treatment programs, and employment opportunities. They also asked us to address the barriers that keep families from participating in the reentry process. The feedback we've heard from young people echoes a lot of what we've also heard from other youth justice system stakeholders, and it mirrors what we know about successful programs to prevent violence and delinquent behavior by youth. We need to base programs in local community. We need to ask youth what they need and tailor local services to those needs. We need to involve families and strengthen family relationships. We need to provide mentors because a long-term genuine relationship with a caring, trusted adult can help a young person develop self-confidence, set goals, and make informed decisions. And centering youth and families means partnering with them as partners and empowering them to share their insights and experiences. It is essential to juvenile justice reform. Also, in our work, we are focused on racial equity. We know that youth of color are disproportionately represented in the juvenile justice system, even though white youth and youth of color commit roughly the same levels of crime. The system is much more punitive and harsh in terms of treatment of youth of color. Overall, youth arrests and youth incarceration are going down, but that means that not all young people are benefiting equally from juvenile justice reforms because racial and ethnic disparities continue to persist. Our children deserve better. Stakeholders in youth justice, we are obligated to challenge and dismantle racial and ethnic disparities in the juvenile justice system. Our children need a juvenile justice system that is truly just. It is up to all of us. This is a monumental task and will require long-term commitment, funding, and action. It demands community and system leaders with vision who are unafraid of making bold moves and disrupting the status quo, inequity by inequity. Thank you all for your commitment to replacing youth incarceration with community-based services that support youth development, address their needs, and increase their chances for a successful transition to adulthood. I look forward to our ongoing work together. Thank you so much. Back to you, Vidya.
Thanks so much, Liz, for your leadership and for being there for all of us and for that powerful call to action. We're really thrilled that you could join us today. And with that, I want to turn over to our panel discussion. Our moderator for today's panel is Phyllis Becker. Phyllis is a steering committee member with the Youth Correctional Leaders for Justice, as well as a senior fellow with the Full Frame Initiative and with the Midwest Center for Nonprofit Leadership at the University of Missouri in Kansas City. Phyllis was the director for the Missouri Division of Youth Services from 2014 to 2019. She has extensive knowledge and experience in youth justice reform, community engagement, and professional development. We're thrilled to have her here today. I'm going to turn it over to Phyllis now to introduce our panelists and get us going. Thanks, Phyllis.
Thank you. Thank you, Vidya. I am honored and excited to be here today as a part of this webinar series, Taking on Transformation. I'd like to thank Liz Ryan for your opening remarks, which has set a great foundation for this webinar, and also for your focus on centering youth, families, and communities. This, as Vidya had mentioned, this is the final webinar, and it builds on the previous webinar in this series, including starting from a racial justice, equity lens, centering youth and family voices, the role of system leaders, the use of data, and shifting resources for transformation. In this session, we're going to have a conversation moving from vision to putting that vision into action. It is my pleasure to introduce this dynamic panel. We have Gina Lyles, who is the founder and executive director of The Hive. Gina used her work as a cultural organizer and a youth advocate with lived experience as a catalyst for the vision of The Hive. The Hive model supports young people as they transition into adulthood without the need for incarceration. The Hive also challenges conventional pathways through the juvenile justice and child welfare system by engaging in healing practices that enable young people to be drivers of generational transformation. Welcome, Gina. Next, I'd like to welcome Suki McMahon, and she is the director of the Collaborative on Transformational Justice at Columbia University Justice Lab's Square One project. Previously, she served as Square One's manager of the Roundtables on the Future of Justice Policy. She was a founding member and founding chairwoman of the board of Austin Justice Coalition and ended her tenure with the organization as its senior policy director. She co-founded and served as president of Equity Action, a 501c4 authorized to support and oppose ballot measures and whose mission is to strengthen and advance local transformative criminal justice efforts. She has served as policy coordinator at Just Liberty, a bipartisan 501c3 organization dedicated to comprehensive criminal justice reform in Texas. And our third, and welcome Suki, and our third panelist, Darren McCall, originates from Michigan, was originally from Michigan, where he received a bachelor's degree in social work from Grand Valley State University. Darren relocated to New Orleans to obtain his master's in social work from Tulane University and began working to provide mentorship and case management to justice-involved young people as a youth advocate at the Youth Empowerment Project. Darren has held a variety of positions at YEP and is currently a member of the leadership team as the Chief Program Officer. In his current role, Darren oversees the design and implementation of the organization's 4 core service areas: YEP Mentors, YEP Enriches, YEP Works, and YEP Educates, as well as the organization evaluation and data management work. Welcome, Darren. So let's jump right into our questions. And this question is for everyone. We know that punitive youth prison models and practices do not work, And we're moving away from these harmful model and practices to a community-based model that invests in the well-being of youth, families, and their communities. Why is fully supporting young people and their families within their communities critical? And what are the outcomes you are seeing from taking this approach? And anyone may start.
Gina, you unmuted first. You want to go?
Sure. So the reason why fully supporting young people and their families within the community is critical is because it helps break the generational cycles of poverty and violence. And also fully supporting a young person and their family also creates a holistic approach. And what that looks like for a holistic approach is being very intentional about how you meet a young person, where they are, whether that is a housing issue, whether that's educational, whether that is opportunities that'll help them advance and be successful in life, and focus on the things that are going to actually get a young person and help their families also get out of poverty in a way that allows them to be drivers of their own transformation, right? And what does it look like for them to have autonomy over their lives and not be controlled by systems that, want to implement their own way of working with community? And that's what holistic really stands for to me. And I'll just say that for right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Gina and Darren. It's nice to be here in conversation and community with you. Liz said it herself. We have young children in these big box, sometimes juvenile detention facilities as young as 10. I lived in Texas until very recently, and there, the 5 that we have still existing are far flung. They're big box facilities. They're overcrowded. They're understaffed. There's neglect and violence and abuse, sexual misconduct. We know that those kids are more likely to be arrested, and they don't have adequate school support. There's a lot wrong. And as Gina says, the justice system for these youth is not a silver bullet for solving all of their issues that so often stem from poverty and other social issues. So yes, urgently trying to move away from this focus on incarceration of people that causes trauma. And we're thinking a lot at Square One about transformational justice, and that's justice that involves or is concerned with transformation. It's a type of justice that when we get through transformative justice, when we have accomplished this idea of creating community-based justice, we will have transformational justice that really has a chance of taking these youth, taking anybody who comes into it and transforming their lives. It should be justice, should be healing, it should be transformative and reparative. So that's what we're moving towards. At Austin Justice Coalition, where I recently left, it was just July, so I'm going to be talking a bit about that and my current job too. We had this project called Higher Learning. It was focused on intergenerational mentorship and community service and anti-racism, and we were working with young people aged 5 to 18. To really navigate the education system, employment systems, criminal justice system, and political systems. And through that, we were really able to help these youth and their parents became really invested in these families to understand what they're facing and the basis in historic racism. And we've worked with other groups that just work with young people whose parents are detained, deported, and incarcerated. And it's a group called Youth Rise. So we've always worked in coalition to have a net for our youth, because we know that as community people around them, we know their challenges better than folks outside in the great state of Texas. So bringing community and our youth and their families closer is crucial in this moment. So I will stop there and toss it to you, Darren.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm also really grateful to share this time and space with all of y'all here on the panel. So I think the only other thing I would add, just from a perspective of like a community-based service provider, is that, a lot of the supports that, Liz mentioned in her opening comments, so access to mental health services, mentorship, school-based services, encouraging connections to families, like these are all of the supports and services that we would hope that all young people have access to. And I think what we see often is that many young people are sort of ending up or being really pushed into our juvenile justice system because they lack access to those kind of like wraparound and robust community-based services. And it's, sort of a failure on all of us that it's like we're only bringing all this support and all these services to the table once people have made a mistake or gotten into trouble or, sort of taken this wrong turn where now we want to sort of like, sort of claim ownership over their success and all the support that we're bringing to the table. So I think that's like one thing. It's just that like these are the things that, this is the kind of support I want my own children to have and any child in our community. So just like recognizing that's like what all young people need. It's more effective than incarceration. And also that like all young people that are involved in the juvenile justice system are coming back to their communities. Like that this is not a, let's like lock them up and throw away the key. So they're all coming back. And so all of those experiences that they have with the justice system will inform how they move ahead in their lives. And hopefully, sort of as community members, we can build that resiliency and get young people back on track and support them holistically. But just that like it's in all of our best interest to invest in young people in these ways. Because we're all in this community and have to share that space together.
Thank you. That makes really good sense. And from your perspective, because one of the things we know that can happen to young people who get engaged in the system is that there's a focus on their problems, there's a focus on deficits, and a lot of telling kids what to do. So how do we flip that and engage families and youth in defining what they need and how they get their services and building on their assets and their needs versus focusing on symptoms and their crimes?
I wanted to take a stab at that, Phyllis. And I think one of the things I was going to say based on the first question you asked is, first and foremost, the community can solve its own issues. Let's just be real, right? But we need to be more resourced, just as how much resources are sent into the current system right now, right? And thinking about those resources, this would also look like solutions that are sustainable enough for youth and families to be successful. And like I say, allow them the autonomy over their own lives, right? A part of restorative justice practices means meeting them where they are. And I can't stress that enough when we talk about what it means to work with community and young people. We are the community too. So it also looks like, crucial social and emotional well-being of our young people being considered, and their families being considered on how we work with them. So like, for instance, systems don't really look too much at the culture. Like you must understand the code, you must understand the culture and the needs from a place that is human-centered. Right. And so once you start looking at the place that's human-centered, you can start really creating resources and solutions that are going to be beneficial to our communities and our families and our young people, and not just creating a thing that that looks well on paper, looks well when you're utilizing data and putting these numbers out. Like really look at the whole human being, the whole person, and we can really take a deeper look at, again, the social and economic needs that actually I guess encourages or really sometimes forces young people to commit what I consider need crimes in the community. If they didn't have a need, most likely the crime wouldn't be committed in the first place. And so just creating a structure that is sustainable enough to last for future generations, not just thinking about a soft touch for the next 3 months, 6 months to the first year. What does it mean to impact the family in general for a long term?
Thank you for that. And thank you for emphasizing, looking at the full frame of young people and their communities and families, because often we have a very narrow view of those folks in our system. So thank you for bringing that up. Who else would like to respond to that?
Oh, I will. You're talking about, you mentioned the deficit that these kids that we're attempting to address, but the deficit is that they're being blamed for the consequences of racism. They're coping, and it's hard out there. I mean, I think that it's important to understand where they are coming from, what they've inherited, what they're having to grapple with. Also, in Austin, we ran this survey called Community Voices, where we went door to door. It was a bilingual survey, and we paid people to take it. And it was their perceptions of policing in the most police areas in Austin. And because we did that door to door, it wasn't a phone call, because we know that typically survey respondents are going to be older white folks because they have the time and phones and things like that. So we did this door to door bilingually. And what they provided to us informed us for years to come, because it came straight from the people. And You know, we had to convince them to open their door and to talk to us because they thought that we were police. But I think that it was really beneficial for them to understand that we really valued what they had to tell us about how they felt about the police in their neighborhoods. And the responses were really enlightening. They were in some ways different than we thought. They wanted to feel safe in their communities, but often that didn't mean police. And they knew that their issues were different than what they were being policed for in their neighborhood. So it was very telling. And we felt like that was building upon their assets, their experiential knowledge of the police and their neighborhood. So that was really important for us to work in concert with them. And we built that survey with a small group of those community members and the police that were assigned to those communities. So it was very interesting that dynamic. But I think that when you're talking about helping them to define their needs, I think that was important to just ask them.
Thank you for that example of engaging the community in defining the problem, because I think oftentimes services are maybe based not on what the needs are or from what the people perceive their needs to be. So thank you for giving us that wonderful example. Darren, would you like to add to this?
Sure, yeah, and kind of building off something that Gina said during her follow-up remarks, something I find myself, reminding our team about often is that, like, whether it's young people involved in the justice system or in a, community-based service, like, we're really involved in young people's life in context of the rest of their life, like a very short period of time.
Right.
And so the more that we can like pour into young people and support and sort of build up their families and their communities. And I mean, I think that relates all the way down to some of the, the systemic issues that are at like the root of a lot of the issues that young people are experiencing. Just the better off that we're going to leave that family when we do, sort of transition, to the next cohort of young people that are coming in and all that sort of stuff. And so that, again, just to echo what has already been said, like, that the justice system or even, sort of nonprofit organizations are not going to be the solution to everyone's problems. Like, the people are going to solve their own problems. And hopefully we can be a resource along that journey and along that path. But I think just really trying to keep that in mind throughout all of our engagement with young people as a community-based service provider, that we're here to support and empower for a very short period of time in the grand scheme of things. And hopefully, we're leaving people with a greater sense of hope, knowing that they can always come back to us if they need some more help and support, and that we can just instill that in them, and they're leaving at least with that. But that a lot of those solutions are going to come from communities and families themselves.
Thank you. Well, let's move a little bit into each of you all's roles in the community. And we're so lucky to have a representation from several places. So we have a community-based representative, and Gina as an advocate and a person with lived experience. And then Suki brings us some of the policy and coalition building pieces of it. So Gina, could you tell us about what the vision of the Hive is, and how did it evolve, and how did it evolve?
Okay, thank you for that, Phyllis. I'll start with how did it evolve, because you have to understand the backstory to understand where the vision came from. And so I'll just start this like real quick overview. My career started literally deeply engaging with young people. That's what I started doing this work as. Engaging with young people, engaging with stakeholders in the community my Richmond community over the last 8 years. So I started working with young people in an artistic program called Art 180 in 2015. It's a youth development organization, after school program here in Richmond. And during that time, a project emerged called Performing Statistics. A lot of you may know of them, the work they've been doing over the past almost 10 years now. And under my many roles at Art 180, I was specifically tasked with the job of as a youth youth engagement specialist, working with incarcerated young people in the local and state facility in Richmond through this program. My lived experience, like you mentioned, Phyllis, that basically gave me an edge and a relatability factor as a credible messenger in these spaces with young people. So during this time period, during performance statistics, we were implementing intensive summer programming. And during those programs, we were working with youth while they were incarcerated or they were able to leave the facility and be a part of this program. It was really, really profound, really innovative project. And I'm just so grateful and humbled to have even started doing this work in that way. And so these program themes were centered around young people and their vision for a world without youth prisons. That was often our prompt to engage young people in an artistic way. And we were able to create a platform that allowed young people to advocate for themselves, but also their communities as well. And so from the many art exhibitions, juvenile justice parades, and many cultural organizing efforts with local advocates, performance statistics started paving the way for new types of conversations when it came to juvenile justice reform efforts locally. And so performance statistics hit, like, I would say, a pivotal moment where we wanted to do more to fill the gaps and realize that we had outgrown this organization, R180, as a program, and we needed to become a project that focused more on a national and I guess national cultural organizing. And it gave us more space to be more intentional about our role. Also in direct service work. That's the work that I took on during performance statistics. And so the project spun off in 2019 and we started our own project. And all of the work experiences and professional development that I received during that time period enabled me to take on a role as a co-director at Performance Statistics as the engagement director. So really, I like to see myself as a youth engagement director. That's what I do best, working with young people. So for close to 3 years, Performance Statistics worked with many states across the country using art for advocacy, youth advocacy efforts across the country. And we did what we did best. We engaged young people, listening to their voices and centering them as experts. And then we began to expand our community locally to a national community by partnering with wonderful groups like the Columbia Justice Lab and also Youth First Initiative. And so the next phase of my work came from that it was obvious that we understood that the systems were slow to change. Like we've been talking about this throughout the panel so far. And for us, no matter how strong our cultural organizing and advocacy efforts were, the changes were not fast enough. So for myself and my current managing director at the Hive, Trey Hart, we knew that we had to do something different in order to see some real transformation in our lifetime. And to be honest with you, Phyllis, we were just tired of playing that game. You know, we were tired of waiting for systems to change. We were tired of playing the game while our young people were hurting. And being in a space where you get to deeply engage with young people, you see the pain in their eyes, you see the pain in their trauma when they show up in the space, And so the vision of the Hive has been on my heart since I was a young person, a teenager, navigating these same systems locally. As you already said, I'm a person with lived experience. So my passion for this work is unwavering and it just hits different. And so we had begun doing a participatory research project through Performance Statistics. We were doing that the whole time, right? By incorporating data and stories of young people all these years. And so we archived every poem, every picture, every raw emotion. And each young person we worked with over the years, they were able to share a part of themselves that they typically don't share with other people because we had to start building, we started with building trust and meeting a young person where they were at. And so bottom line is that young people have been telling us for years what they needed to stay free from incarceration. And so Trey and I realized that at this point, our work needed to evolve to meet the needs of young people. And so we started to build a vision of the Hive. And and I can talk a little bit more about that, but that's where the vision stemmed from, the Hive. And our Hive, our vision for the Hive is basically a future without youth incarceration is simple to us. That's what it is. It's literally our vision statement. We believe in tangible investments in the diverse needs of young people that can reverse intergenerational trauma caused by systematic racism. And we can solve our community's most pressing needs and issues. And so we intend to be a model for what that looks like across the country. And so that's what our vision is, Phyllis.
That's wonderful. And as you implement your vision, how do you see it supporting the well-being of young people? How are they responding to it? And how does it help them to stay out of the system?
I appreciate that. And so one, I'm gonna talk about how we came to what our program structure is for the Hive. And so we did come up with 6 pillars, and those pillars, we got there from the work that we've done over the past 8 years, nationally and locally. And so we have these 6 pillars. These pillars are employment and entrepreneurship. They're near and dear to the Hive: health and wellness, arts and culture, of course, restorative practice, and education. And we came up with these 6 pillars because these are the things that young people said that they needed to empower them to not only see their own greatness, but also to support their own families and their communities in the way that they wanted to. And so our programs really start off by creating a goal, kind of like a goal setting thing that you start when you first get into the program. So what we do is we ask a person, what do you want to do with your life? We don't start with, do you want to go to school? Do you want to go to college? Do you want to go to the military? What do you want to do with your life, right? And so that is the first step of meeting a young person where they're at. And so with that, they say to us, Ms. G, I don't want to work a job. I want to start my own business. Okay, well, let's get deep into this, right? What kind of business do you want to start? Have you started anything yet? And really helping them dream big and think innovatively, right? We have this thing where we set up young people to believe that their way out of the streets and out of incarceration is just getting a job, right? That's another form of oppression. Technically it is. If you want a young person to really thrive, empower them to start their own business. Empower them to further their education in ways that's not just going to support them in that moment, but also support their family and get them to the next level. And so when I think about youth programming and being intentional about it, just recognize that you can customize your programming based on the needs of a young person, because no young person is alike. Every young person has a different background. Their trauma may be complex. You know, we deal with young people on every level. And I think that this model can actually support every young person if us as a community, if we start meeting that young person where they're at right now in this moment and making sure that they have the things they need to stay free. Always asking them, what can keep you out of jail? If that's the first question you ask them, they will give you a slew of answers of what that looks like, Phyllis, right? But we're too busy trying to create what we think a world should look like for them. And they're the experts and they have all the answers. You know, we need to get out of our own way. And so I won't go down a tunnel with that, Phyllis, but that's the best way I can.
Thank you, Gina. You were
You're welcome.
nowhere going down a tunnel. You're taking us down a great path. And the other panelists, if you want to respond to anything each other says, that's okay too. If you have anything you want to respond to with each other. So Darren, let's talk a little bit about your role and as a leader in the community-based model. And how did you all develop? How did YEP develop? And how did it move beyond its original conception and purpose to where you are today?
Yeah, thank you for that. So YEP, or the Youth Empowerment Project, we're a community-based nonprofit organization. Our mission is to engage young people through community-based education, mentoring, employment readiness, and enrichment programming to help them develop skills, strengthen ties to family and community. But that's not at all where we started. So we started back in 2004. And so we had 3 co-founders, 3 women that were doing some statewide juvenile justice reform work at the Juvenile Justice Project of Louisiana. So they had been really strong advocates for, alternatives to incarceration. We really have led some successful campaigns to actually close some youth prisons around the state. And that sort of culminated in the passage of Act 1225 in late 2003, which was this idea of, we're going to sort of close these facilities around the state and we're going to reinvest those funds back into community-based programs and supports and services for young people that will eventually be coming back from those facilities, or to hopefully allow young people to avoid those facilities altogether. And so YEP was founded in 2004, right after the passage of that legislation. And so we were one of the first recipients of one of those community-based contracts. And that's kind of where YEP originated, providing that sort of wraparound, holistic mentorship slash case management support. What we call, those people on our team are, their titles are youth advocate, but it's really this blend of helping young people navigate those systems, as well as kind of being that mentor and providing that sort of more relationship-based service. And so YEP was very small. That was our only public contract. We might have had a few other small grants, but that was sort of the vision, is to provide that support to to some of the most highest need, kind of deep end young people in our justice system. And then in 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit. And so that really just like put the city on its head, but then also scattered everyone on our team, everyone in the region, all over the country. And so YEP was very like young and vulnerable at that time. But, you know, and I wasn't on the team at that time, but from what I've heard, they had an excellent kind of response to that moment of crisis, because our Office of Juvenile Justice didn't have a super solid plan about how they were going to reunite families and locate young people that, you know, maybe had been in a facility, maybe were on probation, but, you know, cell phone service was non-existent during that period of time. So just like finding people was difficult. And so YEP did a lot of that work, reuniting families, getting, you know, young people back in touch with their parents, providing, you know, sort of some of those basic needs, referral to Red Cross and FEMA, all that sort of stuff, helping young people get, you know, bus tickets and things like that back to the city when they were ready to come back. So just any and everything that we could do to young people that were engaged in our programming, these were all justice involved young people at this time, is what YEP did. And so when we came back to the city in late 2005, 2006, you know, just that time in the city's history, there was a huge investment in rebuilding New Orleans. And so that was, you know, this sort of for-profit, you know, the actual infrastructure and all that sort of stuff, but also, you know, our kind of community-based and nonprofit community. There was a large philanthropic investment. And so YEP was just kind of in a position to grow at that time. And I think what we, and this goes back to kind of like listening to young people and families and community, it's just that a lot of our growth from that time forward has been very organic and just like in response to the needs that people have. And so, you know, when folks were coming back to the city after Katrina, this is where our kind of charter school movement in the city started. And so young people were having just like all kinds of difficulties, especially our justice involved young people, with re-engaging in school. And so we just had this influx of 16, 17, 18-year-olds that were just like not in school anywhere. And so, you know, talking to young people, listening to folks is like, well, what can YEP do? We can start a community-based adult education program with like as few barriers as we can imagine. Just like what are we absolutely required to collect? And that's all we're gonna collect, and really just make it easy for people to access. We added adult education. You know, we had a lot of our older justice involved young people that had maybe younger siblings or just young people from the neighborhood that wanted to get involved. Like I said earlier, like wanted to get involved in the kind of things that all young people want to be involved in and have access to. And so we added on more kind of preventive mentoring services and out of school time programming, after school programs, summer camp. We do a sleepaway camping program now. And then we came across a great opportunity to sort of address a long time need that a lot of our young people have with like being prepared for the workforce. And so we layered on, I think in 2012, a job training program. And so that's kind of our 4 service areas now. Yeah, Mentors still remains our kind of like community-based mentorship and case management programming for justice involved young people. But YEP Works is our job training, YEP Educates is our adult education services, and YEP Enriches as our after school and summer camp out of school time programming. And so all of our kind of growth and trajectory, again, has been like in response to the needs that we're hearing from young people, or that like the barriers that our team is coming up over and over and over again in their support of young people. And the growth has been to try to be more preventative, more so on the front end. But I think what has been important about our growth is that we're also not forgetting about you know, a sort of 2-pronged approach. And so we want to engage with young people earlier in their lives, give them the support that they deserve the access to before they get in trouble. But also we don't want to forget about our, you know, sort of young people that are on the other side of the justice system or that adjudication, who also need that same support and need that, you know, sort of like assistance just navigating back out of that juvenile justice system. And so that's kind of where our programming stands today.
Well, thank you for also bringing up the challenges and needs around youth returning to the community. Liz Ryan had mentioned that as something that the young people asked for. And you and Gina both talked a lot about asking youth what they need. So, you know, and also thank you for all these great examples of services and connections and relationships that can happen in community that help young people stay home and stay in their communities versus in
Yeah.
out-of-home placements. So, but Darren, how do you shift from your work from centering your community in your work versus just providing a service to the community? What's the difference?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, again, like it's a lot of this stuff, as I was just reflecting on kind of some of the remarks I wanted to touch on, it's like a lot of this stuff is really not complicated. It's not rocket science. Like YEP is not the first organization in the world to provide mentoring services or job training or after school programming. Like some of this stuff is just as old as time. But I think like just like having always in the backdrop or in the foundation that it's like the young people and the families in the community, like what they need, like they got that part. And so like our role in our work is to like figure out how to make it sustainable, make sure we have like adequate like resources and relationships to like bring the services to the community in a way that's accessible, and just like being flexible, adaptable, which is like the more complicated version of all of this, right? Like we could just say, this is our program model, sign up if you want to check us out, and let's just stay the same. But it's just like year after year, sometimes week after week, we're just like adjusting and shifting and trying to be responsive to what folks need, which again is the more complicated version of all this community-based work, but like so necessary, I think, to stay relevant to the needs of young people and the community, because if we're no longer meeting those needs, then we're not really necessary.
Thank you. Anybody, panelists have any comments or thoughts to follow up with that?
I just like what Darren said about just kind of like when you asked about what does it look like as far as the community engagement. And I think about the community engagement work we've done over the years. And, systems do not do the best job of engagement with families and communities because they impose themselves on families and communities. They impose themselves, and we fit where we're needed at. Kind of like what Darren said, like we have to customize and tailor our support, even when it comes to engagement, the way we engage with people, right? The equity, I see Tamara in there in the chat. It is imperative that we're not doing this because we're self-guided by this work. We're doing this because we are guided by the people that actually want the support. And when we invade or go into a space that that you're not a part of that community, or you're not known, or you're not accepted, or you're like, I use this term a lot in different rooms, as our kids would say, you're the ops, meaning you're the opposition, right? We do everything that we can as community-based people not to be seen as the ops. We do what it takes to be seen as the ops, right? And only community-based organizations and these type of interventions and mentorship and programs are able to do this because we are in the community and we have the trust of the people and we have been consistent. So that's what sets us aside and that's what makes us different in this work. And so community engagement is not the easiest thing to do, but like Darren said, giving people the resources that they need is not a complicated task. We just get out of our own ways and actually really show up for the human centeredness and for the needs of young people. And so, yeah, that's all I wanted to add to what Darren said. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And that whole issue of trust and commitment and relevancy, I think all play into providing effective supports for families and communities and youth. So let's, Suki, from your role and position and your work with the Austin Justice Coalition and your current work with Square One, help us, how did it help you get to a place of community? Does your work help us get to a place of community-based justice?
Yeah, thanks for that. And yeah, I mean, just to speak a little bit on what Gina and Darren were saying, so often these families get caught up on a ride that they're not ready for. They didn't determine where the loops and, the twists would be. They're just in it and they can't get off. They're trapped. So, and that's not serving them, right? But for AJC and the way we're advancing community-based justice. So as an example, AJC is a Black-led organization in Austin. We're a nonprofit. And as Gina said, consistency really matters for that group and being present in the community. But in 2020, we turned our attention to the city budget and to fund community-based justice programs. And we formed, the city formed a reimagining public safety task force that we took part in. And a lot of those recommendations did get funding, and they all had to do with, they all impacted youth and families in some way, like a guaranteed income program, community health workers, those frontline health responders, non-police crisis responders, and diverting 911 calls to the appropriate first responders, and family violence shelters. All of those are going to help our youth and serve them and their families. AJC also seeded money funding to the local restorative justice organization and conflict intervention organization. We were able, those groups were able to divert or handle 46 conflicts, and 84 people were trained, and they created a hotline and marketing in their website. And we were so adamant about these alternatives to the policing and the criminal justice system that we had to support them and show that these actually do work. We have to give them the funding, but it shouldn't have come from us, right? It should have been a priority of the city in their funding, but we knew that they needed some proof of concept, if you will. And that's a hard part with a lot of these community organizations, is that we don't have the capacity for the research that's going to convince these people to give us money. So we have to do a lot of that work ourselves. But either way, AJC also started, they're starting a Radical Advocates Academy. And that's to bring in folks, young people and ages, all ages, to come in and learn about advocacy at the city, county, and state levels. And, that's through training, legislative training, and just navigating the halls of City Hall and such. And that's applicable to any aged person as well. And a lot of the kids in that higher learning program were taking our policy platforms and running with those as well. Square One itself is a narrative and culture change project, and we're really interested in transformative justice and transformational justice. And we do bring in a wide array of people. We bring in young people, we bring in community members, policy people, systems people, artists, because we feel like the more people are sharing this language around transformational justice, and the more audiences, the broader this is going to be and the more impact it will be. So as a narrative change and culture change project, that's what we're trying to do. And we go to locales where our discussions really matter. So we went to Durham to talk about the history of racism and economic inequity there. And we went to Detroit to talk about violence, and Oakland to talk about criminalization at a point in the previous administration where immigration and criminalization were going hand in hand. So we really wanted to address that there. So we're interested in going to these places where these conversations have to matter with this wide array of people. Essentially, Square One's creating these places for groups like AJC to come with these systems leaders and these researchers and policy advocates. And we're all equal partners, and we feel like that's very important too. And it's a values-based operation. We're thinking about centering truth-telling and democratic power sharing and centering human dignity in all of the work that we're doing, and encouraging the people who come to organize along those same values as well, because we feel like those are the values of justice. Square One.
Let me ask you real quickly. So you're talking a lot about structural and policy and legislation. Can you give us some more examples about how that work you've been doing, how it addresses those structural barriers for youth and families? Because oftentimes it's those barriers that impacts kids and families and move them on that path toward justice involvement. So yeah, talk a little bit about that too.
For sure. In every case, we're really trying to bring in youth voices into these circles. So for instance, we're having young adult vision setting evenings and a program dedicated just having young people come in to speak to this critical mass of policymakers.
You're on mute.
Sorry about that.
Yeah,
so these young adult vision setting evenings are really meant for the youth to come in and to tell us what their needs are, and their families are there and their mentors are there. We're having student paper competitions. we're always hosting these at HBCUs and Black-centered spaces and encouraging the young people to come and to take part in these conversations. And they do show up at the table also. So as much as we can, we're trying to ensure that they have the space to be a part of these discussions, because we can't do the future of justice policy without the people who are going to be living that future. And so they have these opportunities to directly address, it could be their, a local or a state politician. We always try to invite the local policymakers to spaces too. So in general, it is a truth telling and narrative change organization and project, so that the people who are empowered to do something with that information have it straight from the horse's mouth, essentially. So we are dedicated to supporting and uplifting those ideas and incubating them in this space where you have all of these different perspectives to really look at an idea of what it means to bring kids closer to home, and to turn it in all these circles, and to try to validate these ideas of bringing kids home. There's no better validation than keeping our children safe, but it's helpful for them to be in these spaces and to be talking about things like violence intervention. We did this a lot in Detroit, where we had DLive there. They were able to address people who could bring these kind of programs to their homes as well. And there's proof of concept there with these young people who had been approached in hospitals by this organization to provide them with those supports. So model building, amplification is a big part of our job at Square One too.
Right. And any thoughts, Suki, in terms of, how this impacts the equity issues that we see in juvenile justice, the kind of work you're doing? And you all also can respond to that if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's about giving those children, those youth, a voice, and in so many ways, providing this platform is equity building, because they're often not at these tables, and we have to ensure that they're able to get involved. So that's why in our previous iteration of the roundtables, they were always live streamed. They were always in these spaces that the young people could attend. And so we are trying to make access as open as possible for young people to show up in this circle. So in terms of equity for Square One, as much as we can, we're inviting the public into these discussions, because there's that nothing about us without us concept. And we believe that the young people have to be represented in these spaces. And as we move forward into our next iterations of our projects, that's even more of a concern and a goal for us too. We're looking for young people to join us in this endeavor.
Great, thank you. And Darren and Gina, do you have any other responses to that question?
I was just going to say, Darren, I see you, great to get into just real quickly. So your youth program should have, your mirror should be equity. How you program with young people, it should be equitable. For instance, we have weekly workshops with our young people, and we bring in workshops based on those 6 areas that I was speaking about early on today. And we actually, evaluate the program facilitator, we evaluate them through the young people. We ask the young people, how did you feel about this program? Would you want to invite them back? What do you want to see in the future, right? And so your programs should mirror that equity. And equity for me is that our young people are treated like VIP, like they are top dogs. They are the experts. They're always going to feel that way every turn they take, and it's all about them, right? And being able to make mistakes and grow up as young people and creating an environment for that, and that is equity for us at the High. So that's all I wanted to add.
Yeah, thank you. Wonderful.
Yeah, and I would just say ditto to that. Yeah, and I mean, just being able to meet young people where they're at and recognizing that, yeah, all the services are not going to look exactly the same for all the young people, but that is how it should be. And so there should be a menu of options, and even that menu includes not engaging in the services that we provide because it doesn't truly meet your needs in the way that you need your needs met. I think just being clear about that and recognizing that that's like a part of the recipe, that it's not a mistake or a shortcoming. That's like how it really should be, and there should be a lot of choice involved in how young people get their needs met.
Thank you. Thank you. So I have another question for all of you. And, as we're moving into these community-based strategies and we're shifting from systems as we know it, there's lots of questions about what roles people play as we move into a new way of doing business. So from your perspective, how can system leaders play a role in elevating and advancing this work as we make these kind of shifts? And why is their role so important?
I'll try to answer that. This is collective liberation, and I feel like systems leaders have to be a part of that. There is something on the other side of this version of justice that we're trying to achieve that's for everyone. This isn't a space that's supposed to be dehumanizing. We've been through enough of that. I feel like, especially if it's Black-led, we've been thinking about human dignity for a long time and liberation for a long time. And I think that there needs to be some trust in that. But also, I think that I'm saying that we're not trying to be retributive. We've been through enough of that. So I think that systems leaders can really be a part of this by thinking about their own funding and what it means to divert some of this funding to these various programs that they're aware of, or maybe not even yet aware of in their communities. They can do convenings similar to the ones that Square One is doing that are values-based, that are based on truth-telling and democratic power sharing. And that's so important because you're ensuring that the voices of the people who are typically not in those spaces are heard. And on centering human dignity. I think that that's extremely important for them to be thinking about if they're wanting to bring in people in a really conscious way, acknowledging the history of racism, the link between the school to prison pipeline and being spokespeople on these issues. Working alongside your communities and lobbying. So often it makes a huge difference when the systems leaders actually go out and speaking about closing these big box juvenile facilities. In Texas, we still have 600 kids that are locked up, and they're in these 5 big box facilities. And the situation is dire in these spaces. And I think we need our systems leaders to speak openly about that and the need to end that for these young people, 10 to 18, who are stuck in these systems. As a policy person, some of the things we worked on in Austin were ending the juvenile nighttime curfew, which basically criminalizes anyone who is Black at night. Because, Black don't crack. Old Black people look young. Anyone is susceptible to a nighttime curfew. I'm kidding, but it really did make a big difference for our youth to not be criminalized just for being outside. So that's another thing systems leaders can be thinking about. Even folks who are in or connected to school boards and thinking about student codes of conduct, and even the way that young Black kids wear their hair, that's a thing, and the way that they are so quick to punish young Black kids. And we know that is happening. Truancy laws are another way systems leaders can be thinking about change. There are so many reasons that kids are late to school or can't come to school. Sometimes they are the breadwinners of their families. We don't know their situations. It's not a broad swath, blanket, that you can just assume that they're misbehaving. Texas ended suspensions for pre-K to 3rd graders. That's huge. And that's the fact that you think about a pre-K student being suspended from school, that's a baby, and that will impact them for the rest of their lives. The stigma, the 50% chance of dropping out. There are so many things that go along with these early suspensions. Corporal punishment still happens in schools. Divesting from police in schools, another thing systems people can be thinking about. Raising the age. I know there's someone from a few Raise the Age organizations. So policy-wise, those are very specific ways that they can be diverting, bringing funds into their communities, and stopping all these loopholes that are getting kids into these spaces that are going to traumatize them and impact their employment and their housing and so many other quality of life areas. So I would encourage them to be thinking about those specific ways, and also, you know, putting money into these organizations like the Hive. So those are just some ideas. I'm sure that Gina and Darren have others.
Well, thank you. That was so comprehensive and thorough. I really appreciate it.
I was gonna say the same thing, Suki, you hit everything.
She did.
Yeah. And I'm just gonna add like a couple small things. She said it just to kind of, you know, empower or back up what Suki is saying. So I feel like system leaders, their role is just as crucial in this work, because they can, like, be honest with you, they can actually change culture within their departments and their spheres of influence. Also opening the door, like Suki said, bringing other people into the conversation who are typically left out. And it's imperative that they champion this conversation and increase public visibility and don't hide. You know the saying, silence is violence. When you're silent, you're a part of the problem, right? Speak up. And increase that visibility and political will around these issues. And yeah, that was the main thing that I wanted to say about that. Everything Suki said is on point. I agree with her 105%. You didn't miss anything. Thank you, Suki. That's all I'll say on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so ditto. All those
Right.
things. And yeah, you know, a lot of our work is not necessarily in the policy sphere, but you know, I can't like disagree with like just the large scale change that a lot of those recommendations that Suki offered up, you know, would have on our justice system. But maybe down at a little bit more kind of granular level, I think, you know, one of the things that I was thinking about is just like really being clear on the role of, you know, each entity in a justice system plays. And so from like, you know, in YEP's context, we are a, you know, contractual service provider with our Office of Juvenile Justice, as well as our local parish court. And so those like roles and responsibilities are very clear, that those, you know, system entities are not doing any of the doing or the service provision, that they're sort of handing over those kind of like decision points, program design, and just like how we go about holistically meeting the needs of young people over to YEP as a community-based service provider. So those like lines of responsibility are really clear. You know, I think that we have been a part of some other partnerships in the past where those are kind of unclear, and maybe there's multiple people that are trying to sort of interject their perspective or opinion, or, you know, sort of like program design or philosophy into the mix, and then things get complicated. So I think like being clear about the role, and if, you know, system leaders are in the role of like providing more of the kind of like funding and oversight, really leaning into those elements of the role that they play, but letting that community-based organization, who hopefully has a level of like trust and integrity, that, you know, comes along with the services they provide, that you know, that's not something that system leaders need to worry about, whether or not the services are being provided to meet the needs of young people. Yeah.
Deb, cut you off. Sorry.
No, I was just going to add one other thing. I
Yes,
think
please
like,
do.
yeah, the only other thing I wanted to add is just like, and really being intentional about developing these relationships with community members, community-based service organizations. Because I think that, you know, again, just from my, you know, sort of professional work, where the thing I've noticed is like a lot of these things are based on relationships, and that it starts with like a level of trust in people's work. And then we kind of get into the details of whether it's a contract or funding or, you know, some other kind of formal partnership. But being intentional about building those relationships with community-based organizations and community members, because that is only going to help inform improvements to the system, you know, sort of in my opinion. And so that, you know, YEP has been around for 18 years. We serve like, you know, 800 young people a year at this point. But at one point, we were just a little tiny organization with like 5 people and served 25 kids in our first year. And so, but there was like a level of trust and relationship that sort of started us on this path. And so just like giving, you know, sort of less established organizations and entities a chance, and being able to really leverage those relationships to hopefully scale effective interventions.
Thank you so much. So we're going to move to some of the questions from our participants. And just to thank you for your responses. And I really love the idea of collective transformation. So kind of wrap that little piece of the conversation up with that. So one of our attendees are asking about young people who are charged with high-level offenses, such as first-degree assault, attempted murder, and and that is a question that we hear asked a lot about moving into community-based. What about young people who have these kind of high-level offenses, and how does that work? So any one of you all can tackle that?
I'll just say from a direct service standpoint, it can look different ways. It's not one answer for that, right?
Mhm.
And do these young people still deserve the VIP treatment? Yes, without a shadow of a doubt. Do I feel that these young people need to go into adult incarceration? No, I do not. They're children. And solutions that we could potentially come up with have to be funded and have to be resourced. And I feel like, I know that if you think about all the community-based organizations across the United States, if they have more funding, they could really give some hardcore answers, some hard answers on what we can do to support these young people as well. I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm not giving all my secrets away, Phyllis. That's what it is. You want to come consult with the Hive, you want to help us with some funding and help build this out and what it could look like to support these young people, then that's what it looks like right there. But I will speak about, I think one of the conversations that we've been hearing a lot over the past few years is what does secure care look like for young people that are committing these type of offenses, right?
Mhm.
Secure care can still look caring. It does not have to look like these institutions that are up right now.
Right.
It can look more like a home. It does not have to model the group home style either as well, right? And so the Hive is thinking very intentional about what it looks like when we grow our vision, when we get large, we want a full campus that we want to be able to grow and house young people, and what that looks like, and what the secure care looks like to allow a young person to still have integrity, right? And to still feel they care, so they're a part of the community and they're not feeling like they're locked up behind a cage. So really thinking innovatively, what does it look like to have secure care that young people are not caged like animals? So that would probably be the first answer. You have to meet those requirements. Young people have to feel safe, not just the public feel safe from them. They have to feel safe too. So that's the way I'll answer that.
Thank you, Gina.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point. It's like young people in those situations also need to feel safe. They deserve to feel safe. But I think, and then my perspective as like a social worker, I think the way I would answer that question is just like, you constantly have to be evaluating sort of the appropriate level of care and supervision. And so, yeah, does that mean like a young person commits like a violent crime and needs to be incarcerated until they're 21 for the rest of their life, be transferred to an adult facility? Like, absolutely not. There might be a period of time where that is the appropriate level of care. But if we have this like idea, just like the North Star of like young people should be able to maintain connections to their family and community, be able to like be on a path to rehabilitation at all times. I think, similar to what Gina, I think, was getting at, is just like there's different ways to imagine what that appropriate level of care looks like, where safety and supervision is also important. But that doesn't mean, it's a nuanced conversation and a very individualized conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, and those are the goals. That's it. That's the vision right there. It is the total opposite of what a kid who requires secure care is getting at this point. In Texas Tribune just put out a long form article about this. They have, I've mentioned the 600 kids, but they're depending on teachers and caseworkers to just take them to the bathroom or get water. They're peeing into bottles. They're locked up on weekends for 23 hours. There's no therapeutic programs, no recidivism programs. They took out basketball and fostering shelter dogs. Like everything that was even slightly humane is gone. They have half of those kids have been on suicide watch this year. Is that the environment we want these kids who need the most help to go into? And obvious, there's an obvious answer to that. So I think that Gina and Darren have shared with y'all the vision of what this should and could be, because what we're doing now is just who's it serving, who's it helping, and we can agree that it's not anyone. So I think that whatever that process is, like, go talk to the Hive and see what the the pathway is, because it can't continue with what we are doing. Go Hive.
Yeah, such wonderful points. And we know that when we're looking at that continual care with kids, that no matter, what kind of problems a child is bringing into the system, they have developmental needs, and meeting those developmental needs are going to be the things that help kids get on the right track, and addressing the things that are impacting them, causing them to get to where they are in our systems. I know when I was running a system, our high secure programs were homey. They were respectful of young people. They wore their own clothes. We focused on education. We focused on helping them do whatever they needed and their families needed to be successful. And so it's kind of a myth that high secure kids don't need the same thing that all kids need. Thank you for answering that, because that is a big question and concern that comes up as we move into these community-based models. Another question from one of our attendees is that have panelists needed to defend against punitive systems adopting the language of transformational change, but at the same time, they're still fundamentally doing punitive and isolating practices in their programs? And what do we need to do to deal with that?
This is absolutely the co-opting happens immediately, because the system as it is, it's a beast, and it's been around a long time, and it wants to stay around, and it will adapt and it will change according to whatever they're put up against. But in 2018, when Square One first came around, and we were thinking about what our tagline should be, and we were playing with lots of different words, putting them together. We were like, what about reimagine justice? And we felt like we could lead on that in terms of a phrase. It was out there, but it wasn't highly used. So we're like, let's do that. And so we started, and I think that we really did add to the current change that we're talking about, reimagine justice. And it's a directive really, but that's been turned into, reimagine one small part of the justice system. In Austin, they reimagined their cadet academy, and it's the same. It's essentially the same. So yeah, in many ways, that the sayings have been co-opted, and the results have not been what we have desired. So it's a constant shift. It's kind of a game of chess for us out there in the field, trying to make sure that it's understood what that's meant to do, who is responsible, who can be, involved, and everyone should be involved. But I think that there has to be an understanding that we have to front load and be thinking about Black folks and disabled folks in this as well. So either way, yes, that happens. And yes, we have to reassess as things kind of get to that point. That's just my take, but yeah, I've experienced that, and it's harmful.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of transformation work too, so I appreciate what you say. And a lot of times people in systems may have a vision and an understanding, but don't know what it means operationally, and then how to make that happen. So that can be one problem. Sometimes it's a problem of not wanting to let go of old ways of doing things. So there are lots of things that are impacting. I've seen impact that. Well, we have a couple minutes. So Darren and Gina, if you have some last words you want to say before we close up, we're getting close to our time frame to end.
I didn't have anything else just on that last question.
I didn't either, Phyllis.
Okay, wonderful. I want to thank our panelists. your wisdom, your thoughts and the work you're doing. I want to thank you for that as well. And the impact you're having on helping children stay at home and in their communities and with their families. Really appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you, and thank you for attending.